When I think back to 2019, I can't believe how signing a few documents I couldn't fully read turned into losing everything I'd spent 40 years building. I never saw myself as the kind of man who would put $500,000 in someone else's name after knowing them for less than 2 years. I was methodical, careful, always the one checking contracts twice at work, but it turns out even the most cautious people can get swept into something they don't understand. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't even particularly trusting by nature. But I had $480,000 saved up and thought that would be enough to give me a peaceful retirement after years of gray skies and a bitter divorce that took half of what I'd earned. The Philippines seemed like the answer to everything. Warm weather, low cost of living, and a woman who seemed to actually want me around. I thought I'd finally figured it out. I was 67 when I finally pulled the trigger on retiring to the Philippines. I'd spent 42 years in Portland, Oregon, just managing construction projects and coming home to an empty house after my divorce. I felt like I was pretty boring, really. My life was work, TV, maybe a beer with the guys on Friday, and that was about it. Nobody really noticed when I wasn't around. I had $480,000 saved up, although it wasn't a fortune, but I felt secure about the future. I'd sold my house in Portland for $340,000 after the divorce, saved another $140,000 over the years, and I had a pension of $2,800 a month coming in. The financial advisor I talked to said I could easily retire somewhere affordable and live comfortably for the rest of my life if I was smart about it. I got married back in 1982. We went on to have 2 kids. My marriage was fine for about 15 years, then it just fell apart slowly. No big blow-up, just years of growing apart until we were basically roommates who didn't like each other. She wanted the house, wanted her settlement, and I didn't have the energy to fight. By the time 2015 came around, I was 63 and completely worn out from it all. I'd been to the Philippines once before with work back in 2015. We had a project in Manila that needed oversight for about 3 weeks, and I wasn't looking forward to it, if I'm being perfectly honest. I thought it would be crowded, chaotic, too hot. The thing was, the exact opposite was actually the case. The Philippines opened my eyes to everything. People were friendly, the food was incredible, and I realized my money could go so much further there than Portland. By the time 2017 came around and I was 65, I started thinking, why was I even staying in Portland? I could retire early. I had enough saved. The pension was solid. I could live in the Philippines on half of what I was spending in Oregon, have a nice place, maybe even find someone to share it with, and actually be happy for once. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I joined a dating site in the Philippines in early 2018. I think it was called Asian Dating, or something like that. I forgot what the exact name of it was, but it was clear that there were more girls on there than guys. And it was quite interesting to receive messages from girls in their early 30s saying they wanted a serious relationship with someone just like me. I got it that they came from a poor background and needed financial support. I understood they wanted a better life, but I wanted a better life as well. And by being with someone like that, I thought I would have a better life. I wasn't looking for some young party girl. I just wanted someone who'd be there, who'd actually care, and who wouldn't drain my bank account the second I looked away. Before long, I started talking to one girl who was from Cebu City. Her name was Desiree. She was only 33 years old, but it was as if she completely looked past my age and appearance and looked at who I was inside as a person. She worked at a call center, had her own apartment, and seemed like she had her life together. That impressed me more than anything. She wasn't some bar girl. She had a real job, paid her own bills, and seemed independent. We talked every single day for about 4 months. She'd message me during her lunch breaks. We'd video call at night my time, morning her time, and we just clicked. She asked about my kids, my work, what I liked to do. I asked about her family in Bohol, her job, her dreams. She said she wanted to open a small business someday, maybe a cafe or a convenience store, something stable. That sounded reasonable to me. Practical, real. It only took me about 5 months to decide to go and see her. I booked a flight to Cebu in August 2018, stayed for 3 weeks, and by the end of it, I was completely convinced this was the woman I'd been looking for my whole life. When I called my daughter and told her that I met someone online and she's actually younger than you, I could hear her sigh as if to say, "Here we go, Dad." She said, "Just be careful. You don't really know her. People can be anyone online." But I didn't want to hear it. I told her Desiree was different, that she had a job, that she wasn't asking me for money. My daughter just went quiet and said, "Okay, Dad, I hope you're right." When we met in person, I was 66 and she was 33. I'll admit there was an age gap, but she said she didn't care. She said that age was just a number, that she dated guys her age and they were immature and irresponsible. She said she wanted stability, someone who knew what they were doing in life. In a way, I felt like she was the more experienced of the two of us. She'd been married before to a Filipino guy who drank too much and couldn't keep a job. She seemed like she knew what she wanted. Part of me knew what the game was in the Philippines. And part of me had already come to the conclusion that maybe she did want financial security from me, but I wanted companionship from her. So wasn't that fair? We both got something out of it. I chose to see it that way. I chose to ignore the little voice that said this was all moving too fast. For the first 3 weeks I was there in August 2018, everything was perfect. We met for coffee every morning, went to the malls, took a trip down to Moal Bowl to see the sardine run, and I found myself opening up to her more than I expected. She was easy to talk to. She laughed at my jokes. She held my hand in public and didn't seem embarrassed to be seen with an older foreign guy. That mattered to me more than I wanted to admit. After that first trip, I went back to Portland, but we kept talking every single day. I went back to visit her again in December 2018 for a month, and that's when we decided to take things further. She was still living in her small studio apartment near the call center, working night shifts to match US hours, and I could see she was exhausted all the time. It just made sense for me to help out a little. She was working at the call center and making around 18,000 pesos a month, which was only about $350. She had a daughter from her previous marriage, a 7-year-old girl living with her mom in Bohol. Desiree sent money back every month to support her. I agreed to send $400 a month to cover her daughter's expenses so Desiree wouldn't have to stretch herself so thin. I felt like this was a fair amount and it wasn't going to break me. It was less than I used to spend on my truck payment back in Portland. I was happy to make those changes because a part of me always was looking for a connection and to have someone to go home to in the evenings. We'd cook dinner together, adobo or sinigang, watch Filipino soap operas I didn't understand but she'd translate for me, and just exist together. She'd massage my shoulders when I was sore. She'd make me coffee in the morning. She seemed to genuinely care, and that was all I wanted. After we had been together for about 8 months, with me visiting every few months and us talking constantly, I had to pull the trigger and ask her to marry me. I wanted to take things further with her, and I felt like she would want the same, which she did. I proposed in April 2019 during my 3rd visit. We decided to get married quickly, both excited about it. We got married in Cebu City Hall in May 2019, just a small ceremony with her family, and I felt like my life was finally starting over. After things went smoothly for about 3 months after we got married, it only seemed logical to look for a place of our own. I wasn't about to rush into things, though. And first things first, let's just buy a condo in Cebu where we could live, something modern and comfortable. We started looking around Cebu City, places in IT Park, Lahug, near Ayala Mall. I wanted something central, something that would hold value. After looking around for about a month, I settled on one condo unit in a new development near Business Park that seemed to offer everything I was looking for. It was 65 square meters, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, nice, view, good security. I looked at similar units for rent in the area, checked the occupancy rates, looked at rental yields online, and after all the research I did, it seemed like it was a good price at $95,000, and if we didn't live there ourselves, we should be able to rent it out and make a return of around 6 to 7%. I sold about $95,000 worth of my index funds back in the US and purchased that first condo in June 2019. We moved in immediately, furnished it nicely, and I felt like I'd finally made the right decision for once in my life. Desiree loved it. Her family came to visit and were amazed. I felt proud. After about 6 months went smoothly, Desiree started talking about maybe getting something near the beach. She said her family in Bohol had found some land for sale near Panglao, close to Alona Beach, with ocean views. She said we could build a retirement house there, somewhere peaceful, somewhere we could eventually move to permanently when I got older and wanted to slow down, even more. We went to look at the land in January 2020, just before everything shut down for COVID. It was beautiful. Half a hectare, elevated, you could see the ocean from the top of the property. The road wasn't fully paved yet, but the area was developing fast with all the tourist infrastructure from Panglao Island. It seemed that the owner was very eager to sell it because they needed some money quickly for a family emergency. We bought that land for $45,000. It wasn't much money compared to what land cost back in Oregon, and it seemed like a good investment. Property values were going up in Bohol with the new airport and all the resorts being built. We planned to build a house. Nothing huge, just a nice 2-bedroom place where we could retire eventually. As a foreigner, I wasn't allowed to own land in the Philippines. Most definitely not land, and therefore not a house built on it. That was something that really annoyed me, because I felt like if I could have done everything properly in my own name, things may have turned out better. But we were married. She was my wife. What was hers was mine. Legally, we were a team. So I put the land in her name and didn't think twice about it. Our budget to build the house was $140,000, and for that we'd get a proper 2-story beach house, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, nice kitchen, veranda with ocean views. Desiree's uncle was a contractor, and he said he could do it for a good price, family discount. We started building in March 2020, right as COVID hit, so everything got delayed, but we kept pushing money into it over the next year and a half. By late 2020, with the house construction moving slowly because of COVID lockdowns, Desiree brought up the idea of buying another property in Cebu as an investment. She said real estate was the safest place to put money in the Philippines, that rental income would help us, and that while property prices were down because of the pandemic, it was actually the perfect time to buy. I looked at it and thought about how my pension was steady, how we still had over $200,000 left, and how rental income could supplement everything. The thing was, it did make sense on paper. People always need places to live. Cebu was growing. We found another condo unit, this time in Mandaue, closer to the call centers and factories. It was smaller, 45 square meters, 1 bedroom, but the price was right at $120,000. And the developer said we could get $500 to $600 a month in rent easily. I sold more of my U.S. investments and purchased it in July 2020. This one we put in Desiree's name from the start since the foreign quota was full. Things seemed okay at first. We found a tenant within 2 months, a young couple working at a call center, and the rental income started coming in. The Bohol house construction kept going, slowly but surely. I felt like I was building something real. But then the family requests started escalating. Before we were married, Desiree never asked for anything from me beyond the $400 a month for her daughter. She was happy and content just being able to spend time together and plan our future. But after we were married, and especially after we bought the properties, I could feel like she was more comfortable asking, but not comfortable in a positive way. Comfortable in a way where the boundaries were gone. It started in August 2020. Her mom needed $800 for a medical procedure, something with her kidneys. I sent it. Then in October, her brother needed $1,200 to fix his motorcycle that he used for work as a delivery driver. I sent it. Then in December, her sister's house needed a new roof before typhoon season, $1,500. I sent it. Every time, I told myself it was the last time, but every time another request came, by mid-2021, I'd sent approximately $35,000 to her family for various emergencies. I wasn't tracking it carefully because each request seemed reasonable on its own. Medical emergencies, house repairs, school fees for nieces and nephews, a funeral for an aunt. I couldn't say no to a funeral. What kind of person says no to that? I didn't send them money without hesitation, though. Every time she brought it up, I would initially say I was going to say no, but she just kept pushing and pushing. She'd cry. She'd say her family would think I didn't care about them. She'd say that in Filipino culture, family helps family, and that if I really loved her, I'd understand. I couldn't bear the thought of having a miserable woman next to me, giving me the silent treatment for days, ruining the peace I'd moved halfway around the world to find. We lived in the Cebu condo most of the time. Desiree had quit her call center job after we got married since I was covering all the expenses anyway, and she said she wanted to focus on managing our properties and taking care of me. Our routine was simple. We'd wake up around 8, she'd make breakfast, we'd watch TV or go to the mall, come back, and she'd cook dinner. I was starting to enjoy the slower pace. Cebu City itself was busy, traffic was terrible, pollution was bad, but I got used to it. But when we went to Bohol to check on the house construction every few months, I felt different. The beach, the quiet, the fresh air, it reminded me why I'd left Portland in the first place. I could see us retiring there, spending our days walking on the beach, maybe getting a dog. One thing I noticed very quickly being in the Philippines was how cheap everything was compared to the US. A meal at a nice restaurant was $10 for both of us. A haircut was $2. A month of groceries was maybe $300. I thought with my pension and the rental income, we'd be set forever. I didn't realize how fast everything was adding up elsewhere. I tried to integrate. I learned some basic Cebuano phrases, got to know her family, made friends with a few other expats at a bar near our condo. Everyone seemed to have similar stories. Met a Filipina, bought some property, sent money to the family. Some guys seemed happy with it. Others seemed trapped but wouldn't admit it. But underneath, I already knew I was caught in something I just couldn't pull myself out of. The money was going out faster than I'd planned. The house construction in Bohol kept going over budget. Desiree's requests weren't stopping. And I felt like if I said no, if I put my foot down, the whole thing would fall apart. And then what? I'd be alone again, in a foreign country, with properties I couldn't legally own. By early 2022, I'd already spent approximately $360,000. I had about $120,000 remaining in my US accounts. My original plan was to spend maybe $250,000 on property and investments, keep the rest as a cushion, and live off my pension. But reality was different. I told myself $3,500 a month total would be enough for everything, but within 6 months of getting married and buying properties, it was closer to $5,500 to $6,000 a month when you added up. Condo association fees and utilities in Cebu, $400. Construction payments for Bohol House, $2,000, $3,000, varying. Family support, now averaging $800, $1,000, month our living expenses, $1,200. Property taxes and insurance, $300. Desiree's personal spending salon, shopping, phone, $500. And months where there were emergencies or special occasions, it could spike to $8,000 or more. No matter how many times I looked at the figures, I couldn't explain where it was all going. It just kept bleeding out. One evening in March 2022, I sat her down and told her it couldn't go on like this, that our budget had to be $4,000 a month maximum and there was no more for extras. I tried to make it sound firm but fair, and I told her that if we wanted to have any kind of future together, we had to stick to it. She needed to tell her family no sometimes. It wasn't my job to support her entire extended family. She nodded and didn't argue in the moment, but I could tell she wasn't happy. Her face went cold. She was quiet for the rest of the night. The morning she was fine, acting like nothing happened. But I knew the conversation hadn't actually changed anything. Every request after that turned into an argument. Every peso I questioned, and I found myself second-guessing whether I was the one being unreasonable. She'd say things like, "You're rich compared to us. This is nothing to you." Or, "My family thinks you're selfish." Or, "I thought you loved me." And I'd feel guilty, like maybe I was being cheap. Maybe I should just let it go. Things did change after we got married, in a way I wasn't expecting. Before we were married, Desiree never asked for anything from me beyond basic support for her daughter. She seemed independent, responsible, grateful for any help I gave. But after we were married, especially after the properties were in her name, I could feel like she was more comfortable in a way that made me uneasy. She started spending more on herself. Hair and nails every week, new clothes constantly, a new iPhone when her old one was fine, jewelry from the mall. When I asked about it, she'd say she deserved to look nice, that she was my wife and it reflected on me if she looked poor. I didn't have a good answer to that. She also started going back to Bohol more often by herself, sometimes for a week or two at a time. She said she needed to check on her daughter, supervise the house construction, spend time with her family. I understood that, but something felt off. We had an agreement that if one of us called, we'd pick up right away, but when she was in Bohol, she'd often not answer for hours. Her excuses were always reasonable. She was with her family at a birthday party. Her phone died and there was no electricity at her mom's house. She was at the beach with her daughter and left her phone in the car. The signal was bad in certain areas. Each excuse made sense on its own, but the pattern bothered me. I tried to ask her about it, but she'd brush it off, say I was being paranoid, that she wasn't doing anything wrong. I chose to let it go because I didn't want to be that jealous, controlling husband. But I knew something was going on. In April 2022, she went to Bohol for 2 weeks. She said the house was almost done, and she needed to be there full-time to finalize everything with her uncle. I stayed in Cebu. During those 2 weeks, I could barely reach her. Calls would go to voicemail. Texts would get responses hours later. When I did talk to her, she sounded distracted, distant. When she came back to Cebu, she seemed different, more secretive. She'd take her phone with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. She'd get messages late at night and turn the phone away from me when she replied. I asked her once if everything was okay, if there was something she wanted to tell me, and she got defensive, asked me why I was accusing her of things, said I should trust her more. I wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. The trust was breaking. I felt like a fool. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd handed over my entire life savings to someone who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. By June 2022, I felt completely stuck. I'd spent $400,000 of my $480,000. I had $80,000 left, plus my monthly pension of $2,800. That should have been enough for a comfortable retirement, but it felt like nothing now. The properties were in her name. If I left, I'd have nothing to show for 3 years of my life and almost $500,000. I was quite friendly with one expat I'd met at a bar near our condo, an Australian guy named Dave who'd been in the Philippines for 15 years. When I told him I'd put the Bohol land and house in my wife's name because I couldn't own it as a foreigner, I remember him just shaking his head and saying, "Mate, you're fucked if things go south. She owns it. You're just renting space in her life." I didn't want to hear it though. I told him it was different with us, that we were actually married, that she loved me. He just shrugged and ordered another beer. I tried to confront Desiree about the money in July 2022. I sat her down with a spreadsheet I'd made showing every expense, every transfer, everything. I told her we'd blown through $400,000 in less than 3 years, and it couldn't continue. I needed to know where the money was going. I needed transparency. She got defensive immediately. She said I was treating her like a child, that she wasn't stealing from me, that every peso went to legitimate things. She said the house construction cost more than expected because of inflation and COVID delays. She said her family needed help and that was part of Filipino culture. She said if I really loved her, I wouldn't interrogate her like this. The conversation went nowhere. She didn't see a problem with any of it, and I realized that in her mind, My money was our money, but our money was really her money to do with as she pleased. I had no control anymore. I couldn't believe I'd let this happen. Every day I felt more trapped. The house in Bohol that I'd paid $185,000 to build didn't feel like mine. The condo we lived in didn't feel like mine. Even the life I thought I was building didn't feel like mine anymore. In August 2022, about 3 months after my last failed attempt to talk about money, we planned to go to Bohol together to finally see the completed house. I was actually looking forward to it. Despite everything, the house was supposed to be beautiful, and I thought maybe once we moved there permanently, things would get better, simpler, quieter. We took the ferry from Cebu to Tagbilaran, then hired a van to take us to Panglao where the property was. The drive took about 90 minutes. When we turned onto the rough road leading to our property, I was excited. I hadn't been there in about 6 months, and the last time I saw it, the structure was up but nothing was finished. But when we arrived at the property, something was immediately wrong. There was a large sign posted on the gate. I couldn't read all of it because it was in Tagalog, but I could make out "Foreclosure Notice" in English at the top and some official-looking seals from a bank. "What is that?" I asked Desiree, pointing at the sign. I could see the look on her face change completely, like the realization that she'd forgotten something important, like she'd been caught. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's a mistake," she said, her voice shaky. We got out of the van. The gate was locked with a chain and padlock that wasn't ours. I walked up to the sign and tried to read it more carefully. It was from a rural bank in Bohol. It said the property had been used as collateral for a loan, that payments hadn't been made, and that the property was being seized. "Desiree, what the fuck is this?" I was trying to stay calm, but my voice was rising. "This is our house. Why is there a foreclosure notice?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, looking at the ground. "Desire, answer me." She started crying. I needed money. My family had problems. I took a loan from the bank using the land as collateral. I thought I could pay it back, but how much? I interrupted. "I don't know exactly. How much?" "Maybe 2 million pesos. That was about $35,000 USD. I felt like I was going to be sick. When did you do this?" "Last year. Maybe. October or November 2021. October 2021. That was less than a year after we'd bought the land and started building. While I was still sending money for construction, she'd taken out a secret loan against the property." "What did you use the money for?" She was sobbing now. "My brother needed money for his business. My mom needed surgery. My cousin needed stop. I couldn't listen anymore. So let me get this straight. I gave you $185,000 to buy this land and build this house. And while I was doing that, you took out another $35,000 loan against the property without telling me, and now we're losing everything?" She nodded, still crying. "Can we pay it off? How much is owed?" "I don't know. Maybe 2.5 million now with interest and penalties. $44,000. We'd need $44,000 to save the property." I looked at the house. It was beautiful, actually. 2 stories, white paint, nice windows, the veranda I'd imagined. It was everything I'd wanted, and it was gone. "What about the Cebu condos?" I asked, suddenly terrified. "Please tell me you didn't." She wouldn't look at me. "Desiree, the one in Business Park. I used it for a loan too. A smaller one, just 800,000 pesos. $14,000. She'd taken another $14,000 loan against our primary residence. When? March this year. 4 months ago. While I was sitting in that condo, thinking it was ours, it had a lien against it that I knew nothing about. What about the Mandawi condo? The rental property? That one is okay," she said quietly. "At least there was that." "So let me do the math here," I said, my voice cold now, the anger giving way to something worse. a kind of hollow devastation. The Bohol property that cost $185,000 to buy and build is gone. The Cebu condo that cost $95,000 has a $14,000 lien against it that I didn't know about. And you've been lying to me for over a year. She didn't respond. She just stood there crying. The van driver, who'd been waiting awkwardly by the vehicle this whole time, asked in broken English if we wanted to go back. I said yes. We rode back to Tagbilaran in complete silence. That night, staying in a hotel in Tagbilaran because I couldn't stand to be near her, I did the full calculation in my head. Started with $480,000 Cebu Business Park condo, $95,000 Bohol land plus house, $185,000, now lost, Mandawi condo, $120,000, family support over 3 years, approximately $60,000, living expenses, construction overages, her personal spending, $20,000 total spent, $480,000. I had approximately $15,000 left in my U.S. account, plus my $2,800 monthly pension. I'd lost everything. The next morning, I met with a lawyer in Tagbilaran that someone at the hotel recommended. I explained the situation. He reviewed the documents Desiree finally gave me and confirmed what I already knew. The Bohol property was in foreclosure. Since it was in her name and she'd signed the loan documents, there was nothing I could do. The bank would seize it within 60 days if the loan wasn't paid in full. The Cebu Business Park condo had a lien against it, but it was smaller and more manageable. If we could pay the 800,000 pesos, $14,000, plus penalties, we could clear it. The Mandawi condo was clean, no loans against it, still generating rental income of about $550 a month. The lawyer asked me the question I'd been dreading. Are all properties in her name? Yes. I'm a foreigner. I couldn't own the land, and the condos had foreign quota issues. He nodded sympathetically. He'd seen this before. Then legally, you have no ownership claim. If you divorce, you may be entitled to some value as conjugal property, but that process takes years and costs money, and if she contests it, you might end up with nothing. I sat there in his office, 67 years old, in a foreign country, realizing I owned nothing. Not the house I'd built, not the condo I lived in, nothing. By the time properties were eventually sold or lost over the following months, here's what the final accounting looked like. Opening amount, $480,000 in savings plus pension. Money spent, Cebu Business Park condo, $95,000. Bohol land, $45,000. Bohol house construction, $140,000. Mandawi condo, $120,000. Family support 2019 to 2022, $60,000 living expenses and overages, $20,000. Total spent, $480,000. What remained? Savings left, $15,000. Properties in my name, none properties in her name. 2 condos, total value to $215,000. But I had no legal claim. Income, $2,800. Month pension, what was recoverable. When the Mandawi condo was eventually sold after our divorce and after legal fees, I got back about $35,000 as part of the settlement. The Cebu condo, I paid off the lien and sold it, getting back about $60,000 after fees. Total recovered, $95,000. Net loss, $385,000. I'd spent 3 years of my life and $385,000, and all I had to show for it was the worst betrayal I'd ever experienced and barely enough money to survive. The Bohol house that I'd dreamed about, that I'd spent $185,000 building, was seized by the bank. Desiree's family had already stripped it of anything valuable: appliances, light fixtures, even some of the copper wiring. By the time the bank took possession, it was just an empty shell. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the disrespect. For over a year, while I was sending her family money, while I was paying for construction, while I was living in what I thought was our home, she was taking out secret loans and lying to my face every single day. Every time I'd asked about money, every time I'd tried to set boundaries, she'd made me feel like I was the problem. The night I found out about the loans, I didn't go back to Cebu with Desiree. I stayed in Tagbilaran, in a cheap hotel near the port, and I just sat there trying to figure out what to do. I was in a foreign country where I had no legal right to property, no family, and a wife who'd been systematically robbing me for over a year while smiling to my face. The next morning, Desiree called me. She was crying, apologizing, saying she never meant to hurt me, that she was trying to help her family, that she thought she could fix everything before I found out. She said, "Please, we can work this out. I'll talk to the bank. I'll make payments. Please don't leave me." I just told her, "It's already over. You used me. You lied to me for over a year. I don't care what happens to the properties anymore. I just want out." She started begging, "Please, Lyle, I love you. I made mistakes, but I love you. Where will I go? What will I do? That's not my problem anymore," I said, and I hung up. I spent the next 2 weeks in Tagbilaran, then moved to a cheap apartment month to month in Cebu City, away from the condo we'd shared. I contacted a lawyer about divorce. Under Philippine law, divorce isn't recognized for Filipinos, but annulment was possible, though expensive and slow. My lawyer said a better option might be to get a divorce in the U.S. since I was American, then have it recognized for property settlement purposes. Meanwhile, Desiree tried everything. Week 1, crying, apologizing, showing up at my apartment. She'd wait outside my building, try to talk to me when I came out. She sent me long text messages about how sorry she was. She had her family call me, her mom crying on the phone, saying I was breaking her daughter's heart. I ignored all of it. Week 2, anger, blame shifting. She sent me angry messages saying I never understood Filipino culture. She said I was selfish, that I had so much money and her family had nothing. She said I was abandoning her just like her first husband did. She threatened to keep everything since it was all in her name anyway. Week 3, bargaining, threats. She offered to sign over the Mandaue condo to me, which she couldn't legally do easily, and I knew it was just a manipulation. She said if I helped her pay off the loans, we could start over. When I refused, she said she'd make sure I got nothing in the divorce. Week 4, silence. She finally stopped contacting me. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved back to Bohol. My lawyer said she was going to contest the divorce and any property claims. My plan was to stay in the Philippines just long enough to sort out the legal situation and try to recover whatever money I could, then get back to the U.S. I had about $15,000 in the bank, a $2,800 monthly pension, and nothing else. I was 68 years old, starting over from scratch. When she realized I was serious about leaving and divorcing her, she finally dropped the act completely. She hired her own lawyer and filed a counterclaim saying I'd been financially abusive, that I'd controlled all the money, and that she deserved everything. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. The legal process dragged on for almost a year. We eventually reached a settlement in mid-2023. She kept the Cebu Business Park condo, which still had the lien I ended up paying off before the sale. The Mandaue condo would be sold and proceeds split 60-40 inches my favor since I could prove I'd paid for it entirely. The Bohol property was already foreclosed, so there was nothing to split there. Neither of us would pay spousal support to the other. After selling both condos and paying legal fees, I walked away with about $95,000 total in late 2023, nearly a year and a half after discovering the betrayal. The flight back to Portland in November 2023 felt like punishment. Not for the money I'd lost, but for all the time I'd wasted convincing myself everything was real. 3.5 years of my life, gone. Almost $400,000 net loss, gone. Back in Portland, I had no house waiting for me. I'd sold it to move to the Philippines. I had no choice but to start over from the bottom. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Gresham, one of the cheaper areas outside Portland. The rent was $1,200 a month. Here's what my new reality looked like. Living situation: one-bedroom apartment, Gresham, Oregon. Financial situation: $95,000 in savings, $2,800 month pension. Work situation: too old to go back to construction management, but I ended up taking a part-time job at Home Depot just to have something to do and supplement income. Age factor: 69 years old, starting over, no house, no retirement security. The math was brutal. My pension was $2,800. My rent was $1,200. That left $1,600 for everything else: food, utilities, car insurance, health care. I was surviving, but barely. With my $95,000 savings, I had a buffer, but at 69, that money needed to last potentially another 15 to 20 years. In the Philippines, I'd been living well on $3,500 a month total, when it wasn't being drained by Desiree's secret loans. In Portland, I couldn't even cover rent and groceries on my pension alone. The irony was crushing. The anger has never left me. The bitterness stayed in everything I did. And all I could think was that I traded away the last chance I had at a comfortable retirement for something that was never real in the first place. I'd been a project manager for 40 years, someone who reviewed contracts, someone who was supposed to be careful and methodical, and I'd been played like a complete fool. I hate her for it. I hate her for lying to me every single day while taking out loans against property I paid for. I hate her for using her family as an excuse to drain me dry. I hate her for the foreclosure notice on a house I'd dreamed about for years. But I hate myself more. I hate that I ignored every red flag. I hate that I put everything in her name. I hate that I kept sending money even when I knew something was wrong. I hate that I chose loneliness and ego over common sense. If I could do it over, I would change everything. Never put property in someone else's name. Doesn't matter if you're married. Doesn't matter if you legally can't own it. If it's not in your name, it's not yours. Walk away from deals that require this. Set firm financial boundaries from day one. Agree on a budget in writing. Stick to it. No emergencies without both people agreeing. No secret loans. No exceptions. Listen when family and friends warn you. My daughter warned me. Dave the Australian warned me. I ignored them because I thought I knew better. I didn't. Don't ignore behavioral changes after marriage. Desiree changed completely after we got married and after properties were in her name. The girl who never asked for money became someone who demanded it constantly. That should have been my exit signal. Keep emergency money separate and untouchable. I should have kept at least $100,000 in the US that she didn't know about. Money that was mine alone, that could never be touched. That would have saved me. I'm 69 years old now. I'm working part-time at a hardware store. I'm still living in my same small apartment in Gresham. I thought I'd be on a beach in the Philippines, retired, comfortable, with a woman who loved me. Instead, I'm surrounded by gray Portland skies again, barely getting by, and working a job I should have been done with 10 years ago. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. If you're thinking about retiring to the Philippines, about marrying a woman 30-plus years younger, about putting property in her name because you trust her, learn from my mistake, don't do it. The risk isn't worth it. I'm still living in Gresham, Oregon, in the same one-bedroom apartment I moved into when I got back in late 2023. It's not much generic beige walls, carpet that's seen better days, a view of the parking lot, but it's mine. Well, the landlord's, but you know what I mean. No one can take it from me. No one can use it as collateral for a secret loan. My current financial snapshot as of now, late 2024, savings, $87,000, down from $95,000 when I returned after living expenses and some medical costs. Monthly income, $2,800 pension, plus About $800 from part-time work at Home Depot equals $3,600 divided by month property owned. None. I rent. Debt. None. At least there's that. I started with $480,000 and a $2,800 monthly pension, which would have given me about $2,400 month from the savings safely withdrawn at 6% annually, plus the pension over $5,000 month total without ever touching the principal. I could have lived like a king in the Philippines on that, or very comfortably in a cheaper part of the US. But I don't think you can look back at things and wonder too hard what would have been if I did things differently. It'll drive you crazy. My daily life now is simple and lonely. I wake up, make coffee, watch the news. 3 days a week I work at Home Depot in the lumber section. The young guys there are nice enough, don't treat me like I'm useless, and, honestly, I like being around the tools and materials again. Reminds me of when I was actually building things instead of watching them be stolen from me. I don't have much of a social life. I talk to my daughter on the phone sometimes, though there's always this unspoken "I told you so" hanging in the air. She's kind enough not to say it directly. I grab a beer sometimes with a former co-worker who's also retired. We watch football. I don't tell him about the Philippines. What would I say? I do know now that Desiree, who is still my wife on paper technically, though the annulment is finally being processed, is still in Bohol. I heard through an expat group online that she tried to start a sari-sari store with money from her family, but it didn't last. The Cebu condo she kept got sold eventually, I think to cover more debts. She would have been in a lot better position if she'd just been honest with me from the start, if she'd actually been the partner she pretended to be. But she wasn't. And therefore, she's not doing well either. I don't feel sorry for her. As for the Philippines itself, look, I want to be fair here. The Philippines is a beautiful country, and I'm sure, in fact, I'm guaranteed, that there are real and genuine people there, and there are genuine relationships between foreigners and Filipinos. I met some of those people. I saw some of those relationships. It's not all a scam. But there are also people like Desiree who saw a lonely, older foreign man with money and played him perfectly, who pretended to love him, who smiled while secretly taking out loans against properties he paid for, who drained him dry and didn't feel an ounce of guilt about it. I'm not saying everybody's like that. In fact, I know most people aren't. But it happens often enough that if you're a foreign man with savings going to the Philippines looking for love, you need to go in with your eyes wide open and your bank account locked down tight. I'm telling this story because I want other people out there, other guys out there, to know what can happen. How easy it could be to lose almost $500,000 when you think with, let's just call it your heart instead of your head. I didn't think I was naive. I was a grown man in my mid-60 seconds. I'd been married before, divorced, worked for 40 years in a job where I managed million-dollar projects. I thought I knew better, but I got played right from the start just as easily as anyone else. Maybe easier, because I was so desperate to believe that someone actually wanted me for me and not my money. Here are the specific red flags from my story that you should watch for. Red flag shown. Behavioral change after marriage or after property is purchased. Desiree never asked me for money before we got married. She was independent, paid her own bills, seemed responsible. The moment we got married, and especially after properties went into her name, she became someone else, comfortable asking for money constantly. That shift should have been my exit signal. Red flag #2. Constant family emergencies requiring money. Medical issues, house repairs, business needs, education costs. There was always something, and they never stopped. If you find yourself sending money to her family more than once or twice a year, you're being used. Red flag #3. Unexplained absences and communication changes. When Desiree would go to Bohol alone, she'd become unreachable for hours or days. Phone always dying. Signal always bad. Always some excuse. If your partner is suddenly hard to reach when they're away from you, something is going on. Red flag #4. Pressure to put property in their name quickly. The Philippines has laws about foreigners owning property, yes. But that doesn't mean you have to rush into putting land and houses in someone's name after knowing them for less than 2 years. If they're pushing for it, there's a reason, and it's not because they love you so much. If you see these warning signs, walk away, set firm boundaries, protect your assets, and most importantly, don't think you're special, that your relationship is different, that she actually loves you despite the age gap and the money difference. Maybe she does, but probably she doesn't, and by the time you find out, it'll be too late. 3.5 years ago, I thought I was building a paradise in Cebu and Bohol. I thought I'd found a woman who wanted to spend her life with me, who saw past my age and my average looks and my boring personality to who I actually was inside. I thought I was finally going to be happy after years of gray skies and loneliness in Portland. 3.5 years later, I'm back in Portland, working part-time at 69 years old, living in a cheap apartment, with less than $90,000 to my name and a pension that barely covers my rent and food. I've seen so many people since I started researching this whole Philippines thing back in 2018, come to Southeast Asia with all the best intentions in the world, fall in love with a woman half their age, buy property in her name, send money to her family, and then end up broke and alone. And they're the ones who have to live with the consequences while the women move on to the next foreign guy with savings. The fact that I still have my pension, that I didn't lose literally everything, that I'm not homeless or completely destitute compared to some guys I've heard about who lost more than me, that's got to be good enough for me. Some guys ended up with nothing. Some guys are still stuck in the Philippines, can't afford to leave, living in cheap rooms and surviving on $500 a month. At least I got out. At least I'm home, even if home is a lot less comfortable than it should have been. The Philippines was the country that I always imagined as paradise after that first work trip in 2015. It was a country I wanted to retire to build my dream beach house in, to spend my final years in peace and warmth. I thought that with enough money and the right woman, I could have the life I'd never had. I quickly realized that money makes you a target and loneliness makes you vulnerable, and together they make you the perfect victim. Even after all that happened, I don't entirely regret going. I needed to try. I needed to take the chance, because if I hadn't, I'd always have wondered, what if? Now I know. Now I have my answer. It cost me $385,000 to learn it, but at least I'm not wondering anymore. I thought I was building a paradise that would last the rest of my life. But the truth is, I was funding someone else's future while destroying my own. Desiree ended up with properties, money, and years of financial support from me. She's probably doing the same thing to someone else now. That's the game. Just make better decisions than I did if you want to avoid the same fate. Don't put property in anyone's name but your own, no matter what. Don't ignore red flags because you're lonely. Don't send money to her family constantly. And don't ever think that a 3-3-year-old woman is with a 6-7-year-old man because of his personality. You have been warned.